Clerk will call the roll, please.
Tauschek,
Here.
Herman,
Here.
Mattsdorf,
Here.
Gilson,
Here.
Hildebrand,
Here.
Penkwitz, Binder,
Here.
Nelson.
Here.
We have a quorum for committee of the whole. Next item is approval of the minutes from January 14th, 2025. Chair will entertain a motion.
Move to approve. I'll second.
We have a first and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 3, update on outdoor alcohol consumption at outdoor events. Tim?
Yeah, tonight I'm going to introduce Chief Ruggles, who's going to handle this item. Just a very, I would say, quick update on events. I think we're trying to, again, just like the sort of dog discussion, the dogs in park discussion, we're just trying to right-size our processes. In this case, it's not an ordinance change, but just an update on how we're going to be handling things. But did want to update council at committee of the whole, and I'll turn it over to Chief.
Good evening. Again, as Tim indicated, this is kind of one of those housekeeping issues. As we've noticed things, we're bringing them up, seeking guidance on how to proceed. Outdoor consumption of alcohol is covered under section 1141 of our city ordinance. Specifically, I would draw council's attention to A5, the exceptions under letter A. The provisions of this section may be waived by the common council for duly authorized events. Our question right now is that we don't have a list of events that have been approved by council to include outdoor alcohol consumption on public ways, including streets and sidewalks. We've noticed that at several of the parades, Mill Street Festival, some of the other downtown events, it has become commonplace for people to walk the street and the sidewalks with open containers of alcohol and consume them. Parades, like I said, Mill Street Festival, if you've walked down the street after one of our parades or something, there's a number of empties stacked on the curbs, windowsills, stoops of most of our businesses. We have also observed at some of the events some sale of alcohol going on the sidewalk outside of a couple of our businesses. Specifically, I observed a Jello shot table at one of the bars on the sidewalk right outside the door. Those kind of things are what have drawn our attention to the fact that this has gone maybe farther than we expected and without specific approval by council. So therefore, we're bringing this up. The recommendation we have right now is to update our special event form and to seek from the organizers which events they would prefer to have alcohol, or if they leave that blank, that they don't intend to have alcohol at their outdoor event, thereby seeking approval by council when that event becomes before you. We would then know from that box being checked and council's approval that was considered and that the enforcement of this provision has been waived by you, with the understanding that people can wander the sidewalk or the street in the area of that event specifically with their containers. We would still regulate and prohibit, I think, the sale of any alcoholic beverages on the public street or sidewalk. Those are only granted under unique circumstances. And again, the Department of Regulation here in Wisconsin does prohibit the sale of intoxicating liquor on public ways outside of the licensed premise. So we would try to stay in line with their guidance at this point in time. That's what we're asking for tonight, is your guidance as to which events you would like to be authorized for this. That would allow the police department to not enforce the ordinance during these events and not try to restrict some of these activities. Again, I understand that parades and things, it's commonplace here in Wisconsin that, you know, people like to have their beverages, watch their kids or whatever, watch the parade. We're not trying to prohibit it if that's what council wants. We just want to understand exactly what you're willing to tolerate, and we'll enforce it along those lines.
And I think from a staff perspective, the idea, again, as Chief Ruggles mentioned, is the idea is the event organizer is going to request this, and then it becomes then, as approved, a duly authorized events when you approve those events.
I guess my question would be, if it's a organized event, then who carries the insurance if something happens, and would each establishment presumably be liable for situations that I guess they're participating in, if they're selling it outside the front door of the establishment? where does that cross? We don't want the liability as a city on a city sidewalk.
I think, again, my intent was not to necessarily allow the sale outside of a licensed
Right.
establishment. That would violate their licensing.
Yeah, it should stay inside, yeah.
But there are some events where we've had distributors and such that were approved. Again, specifically, the distillery and the brewery have participated in events on Mill Street previously where we've shut down the street and we've allowed people to wander with beverages. And again, whether or not those businesses continue to participate in the event and are actual, vendors of the event is one of the questions I would have. The other thing is that it is not unheard of to require certificates of insurance from establishments or vendors that are going to distribute such products and let them carry the insurance rather than the city.
Mayor, what I
Right.
would just add in is that events do require certificate of insurance now, and often our nonprofits are able to pull a temporary beer permit, so that's how they're doing the beer sales, for example, at a lot of our events, is through that temporary beer permit, through the nonprofit. That's
My
what-
understanding is though, a nonprofit only gets 2 in a calendar year.
Correct.
I'd have to do a double check on that one.
I believe if they have a license, they're allowed 2 event-type licenses or activities under our current licensing.
I think that's only for wine.
Yeah, it's only
I think
for
it's
wine,
wine.
or
Yeah.
that's unlimited, if they're one of those entities.
Right.
Yeah,
So
'cause
there are restrictions on the number and type of events, and again, there's picnic licenses and other types of licenses in the state, and potentially under our ordinance that would allow certain events. To the best of my knowledge, we haven't had a licensing violation on any of these. It's always been the issue of how far should they be allowed to wander. Again, a more recent event was the cheese drop here just recently, where I'm standing along Mill Street. The event was licensed, had its own permit and everything, and we didn't interfere with anything going on their property. But right before the actual cheese drop, at about 10 minutes due, I had a crowd come wandering down the street from the various establishments on Mill Street, and many of them had open containers in their hands, did not necessarily enter the parking lot, but stood on the sidewalk of Mill Street to watch. That would technically be a violation of our ordinance, both on the individual carrying the beverage and on the establishment that let them walk out with it. And so we're seeking guidance as to where we should enforce and where we shouldn't enforce. The concept was you could approve the events. City parks are also included under this, so for an example, Stayer Park is frequently someplace where we've set up beer tents or something. If that's approved by the council and designated as an event, we would not interfere with that. But we would try to keep it within the area of that event as opposed to walking from the downtown to Stayer Park or something like that with an open beverage if the downtown is not included in the event.
I think
Greg?
the German night, I think they do it pretty well. They have it fenced off. If you're walking around out there, there's nobody coming out, and that. But like the cheese drop, boy, that's a touchy one, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
and-
like, do you not? It's hard. It's hard. For me, I would let them. They're coming for an event.
But on a regular Saturday night, they wouldn't be able to walk down the street. with a
Well,
drink.
for that event, it's like I said.
And if
for
you're
that
not
event.
on the property of the Plymouth Arts Center that holds a license, I don't know why that would be different if you're walking down the street not with a drink.
Under our ordinance currently, it's not different unless council approves the event for such and waives that restriction on the open consumption and public consumption and carrying of alcohol.
But using the cheese drop as an example, how far? Right, from every bar, from your house a mile away that you can walk with a drink?
Again, I would say that we should restrict it to the area identified within the request for the event. So if an event says it's only on the art center property, then we don't want people walking from the downtown to the event. Again, as discussed, if the council wishes to approve it in a larger scale, we just need to know what that scale is. That's been the problem right now, is there's no definition of which events are approved and how far should this be allowed to travel. And I guess that's what I'm seeking as the chief, is where do you want me to draw the line and enforce?
What do other local municipalities do?
It's varied. I've been told that there are municipalities that don't interfere at all, don't enforce, whether they approve it or not. I'm not 100% sure on every community. There are many communities where parades are just, it's a commonplace occurrence, right? You come out of the establishment, stand on the street corner in front and watch the parade go by. And if it stayed in that general area, I don't know that we'd have the question we have. But again, it's grown to the point of not just people exiting a licensed establishment and walking through the event. There's now also the sale on the sidewalk that's occurring from the events. My intent would be at this point in time, depending on how council addresses this issue, is to notify all of our liquor establishments that we're going to start enforcing that provision. You have to keep your sales within your licensed area unless approved under a different event license.
And that's by state law as well.
That is state law currently.
So that's nothing we can even deal with. That's something you deal with, you know? You deal with it on your basis, you know? The thing that gets me is to go back to the cheese truck. You know, it's so hard to distinguish that. And what are you gonna recommend when somebody's walking to an event, you know, and they got a beer in their hand?
So again, at this last cheese drop, I positioned myself, I was there in uniform working that night. I positioned myself right at would be the western corner there of the parking lot and right on the street corner, and I just watched as people came up and I simply said, you know, you can't walk all over downtown with that. And most of them looked at me like I had 3 heads. They'd never heard of such a thing. So this is part of what has driven this question and this concern is I've given warnings to this effect, and most people look at me like they've never heard of this in Plymouth. And so I'm trying to clarify and know what you expect of me and my officers to handle this situation as. The easy thing was to address the specific events if you were willing to approve those and just say, okay, the organizer wants this, council's comfortable with it, we'll restrict it to the area of the event. Again, licensed sales potentially be a concern to me still, but the wandering and such, we'll confine it to as best we can within the provisions of where that event is occurring. I don't intend 10 feet outside of the event to say, hey, cite that guy unless it's causing a problem. It'd be more of a, hey, can you warn him and ask him to finish before he wanders off or something like that.
What Angie mentioned, you know, somebody walking from their house from a mile away with a beer, well, you know, they're in the room. You know, they're just sticking out like a sore thumb. It just bothers me the downtown, you know, that's meant for what it is, you know.
And we don't want to prohibit people from enjoying our events. That's not the goal here. The goal is, I think, to understand exactly what the interpretation of the ordinance is and create the provision for us to understand what council wants of us. How far do you want us to take this particular issue that's occurring? Where do you want the reasonable limit to be?
And how many events are like the cheese drop?
Well, it's just about every parade, as I said. I can tell you, Mill Street, but again, Mill Street has had its own vendors in the past, and there have been changes to things. I believe Fallujah had its own distributors and vendors and such for the same type of activity. So we would have to define those, and I think that's what
So
I'm
would
saying.
they would be on the permit?
Correct. The easy way for us to handle this is to add a box or a line where the organizer tells us we are going to have vendors, we are seeking permission from council to have alcohol in a public way. You could then
And then you
approve or
could take it from
disapprove it
there.
on its own merits for each event. Again, one of the discussion points was whether or not council wanted to give us a list of pre-approved events and just assume that these events are allowed. Again, if all the parades are a reasonable exception, council could tell us from now on, we're going to grant all the parades this exception. But again, then the question of a certificate of insurance would come up maybe for those organizers.
Yeah, because I can't imagine the homecoming parade, the school district is gonna say, yes, we would like to have alcohol on the street at our school parade.
But at the homecoming parade, it's not uncommon to see someone exit one of our establishments and stand on the sidewalk to watch it.
I
So,
mean, many of the bars give to-go cups.
which is also covered under state law and ordinance, I believe, that to-go cups were instituted during COVID, if I'm not mistaken. And again, we're now a couple of years beyond that point. Is that still something you want? Is that something we would want to regulate, or are you comfortable with how it's currently occurring? I have to tell you, I have not had an incident yet in the year and a half I've been here involving a to-go cup necessarily walking out of an establishment. We haven't specifically found somebody drinking out of it necessarily, any more so than tumblers that people bring from home. Again, I can only enforce so much by what I can see without intruding upon, as a search. So if somebody presents to us as intoxicated, and obviously there's all the odors and everything that go with that, then yes, potentially could we search the tumbler of an individual or something to ascertain whether or not, there's alcohol in it. Upon arrest, I would say we could do that. You could open the container lid and take a smell, but it's gonna have to come after the point we've already made a determination of taking the person, either citing them or taking them into custody.
David?
Just a matter of process, if we're going to want to review these and approve these individually, if we're going to provide a list, for example, most of these permits are approved through the consent agenda, right?
Correct.
We're gonna probably want to remove them out of the consent agenda and put them on the individual, would we not?
You would just have to read your consent agenda items.
I think
Well-
I think the intention would be they would remain on the consent agenda. We would just have the additional alcohol permit on there.
Dave,
Should-
you
we
could-
should
you
just
could
mark
remove
one
them.
off.
What's that?
You could
I know
remove-
I can remove, but I'm just saying as a process from the council, if there are things that need to be discussed, like how far from the establishment or something like that, where it goes more into it than just, yeah, it's okay, no, it's not, then, then that's something that should probably come before the council without necessarily being just a rubber stamp in the consent agenda. I realize anybody on here can remove anything they like and talk about it, I get that. I just didn't know, as a process, especially when we're starting up it or something, maybe we want to remove them out of the consent agenda and discuss them individually or not.
I think that's a good concept, good thought, something we could do. I think what we would do as staff is present to council, either on consent or off of consent, where these boundaries will be. So it's not council making the determination. I think
Yeah.
it's the final determination, but we would present the
Yeah,
recommendation.
I think you've heard some comments, come up with some suggestions,
Yeah.
and
We'll,
we can
kind of
kick it around
kick it
again.
around and we'll, right, if the first
Yeah.
one needs to come through as an agenda item for discussion, I think that's totally fair game. And then perhaps in the future, after their approval once, maybe they come back for a consent item, something like that.
Yeah, okay.
It's funny, after 18 months of an ad hoc coming up with the alcohol license, now we have some more,
Well,
As I find them, I'm
Things-
trying to address them.
Yeah.
That's the goal here, and not to make any one meeting overly
No.
heavy on the issues, so.
but it is a valid concern, and you don't want it to get out of hand either.
It's gotten more prevalent as I've worked
Yeah.
here, like I said, and of course, my observations have increased over time, and I just see that it's gone from a kind of we're not gonna address that because it's not a harm, to, well, wait, now we have sales outside, now we have
Yeah.
wandering farther and farther, and it just has become an issue where do you want us to draw this line?
So do
Okay.
organizers still have to pull like a special license for it, or they're just saying, yep, it's okay with us if people,
We're gonna have to examine, I think, the licensing provisions the organizer has already asked for against whoever their vendor may be. Because again, the distillery and the brewery have different obligations under state licensing than, let's say, one of our bars do. So we're gonna have to do some analysis as each one of these come up, and as Tim said, make a recommendation, maybe the first few, until there's a comfort level of what we're asking.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, and no action
Okay.
tonight. This is just
Yeah.
discussion, obviously, get to be aware.
Go through it and bring it forward, and
Good
we'll
discussion.
do it, yeah, good point. Okay. Moving on to item 4, discussion and possible recommendation on section 13-1-106 of the Plymouth Municipal Code regarding commercial wall signs.
Yeah, so tonight I'm going to have the debut of Jack Johnston in front of council. He's going to give a summary of the recommendation. I've worked through this with Jack, and he's done a lot of research and analysis on this. We have some other areas in code where Plan Commission has some additional flexibility, so this is another area that we're looking at. So, Jack?
Sure, yeah, this stems from a Board of Appeals application that was submitted late last year, that was denied. Board of Appeals has to prove basically a hardship. There has to be a hardship to be granted approval. There's really no discretion that the Board of Appeals can use when there's applications before them. In this specific case, it was an issue with a wall sign being erected, I think 29 feet from the ground. The code only allows 20 feet for that zoning district. So my recommendation would be to allow discretion at the Plan Commission level for folks that would seek signage over the currently allowed wall sign height placement. On the back of the memo, you can see current principal building heights as well as the maximum wall sign height placement. In some districts we allow, for example, in heavy industrial, we allow Building heights be up to 80 feet with a conditional use permit, but the wall setback can only be 30 feet. So my recommendation would be adding some flexibility in code for planning commission to approve these on a case-by-case basis. In terms of standards of approval, that'd be something I'd probably want to work with Attorney Bieber on, just so the planning commission would have some guidelines for approval and there wouldn't be just an arbitrary rubber stamp every time. Whether that be through a conditional use permit or just through some standards of approval that are codified in the code. We've worked through that and, hopefully it would come to council later this spring. So obviously happy to answer any questions, but it's just really just about giving the city and the planning commission a little bit more discretion on sign heights.
Any comments or questions of Jack? I think a review of that certainly would be applicable in some of the zoning districts that want a little bit more visibility and how they go about that. Obviously, if the plan commission had a little more flexibility in its presentation decision, that would still come to the council for ultimate approval.
Yeah, and I'm comfortable with that. Going to planning commission first and then with the council being the ultimate approving authority. That's
It might
totally fine.
eliminate some of the appeal process where right now it's rather definitive.
Yes.
I don't have a problem with allowing some of these areas to be a little more flexible and I'll use the word larger in dimensions. I think sometimes they need that kind of visibility. We don't certainly want 50-foot billboards downtown on top of buildings or over the front of the building.
Right, I don't think that's the intention of
No.
this update. This would
Yeah.
just be about letting building owners with maybe taller buildings erect the sign a little bit higher to be in a better view vista for potential customers, especially if these are roadway signs in the heavy industrial district. Some of those buildings can be up to 80 feet tall and only allowing a 30-foot sign being 30 feet off the ground. There could be some challenges with visibility and brand identification and stuff. So that's the goal of the proposed ordinance change, and obviously
But
not
there
quite
won't be
there
a
yet.
change in the size of the sign,
No, just the placement on the wall,
just the
in
placement.
terms of how tall or how high the sign can be placed.
I think you brought that up, didn't you, John? As a item, the signs?
No, I don't think so. Plan commission. Yeah. I don't see a problem with
Yeah, so next
proposing
steps,
something.
this is a
to-
zoning code amendment, so as Jack said, this would, we would work with Attorney Fever, come up with actual ordinance language and some guidelines. It would go then to Plan Commission, and then the ordinance would come back to council.
Yeah, with it being in the zoning code, I think there'd have to be a class 2 notice in the paper,
Correct, yeah, it'd
so
be a public
you
hearing.
probably wouldn't see a final ordinance until maybe a March common council, maybe even April. That's just the process with zoning code updates, you have to do that
Yeah.
also, so.
I think there's merit in some of the taller structures having something,
Sure.
and as long as it's not gaudy or something.
Yeah,
Um,
yep. Yeah, that would be the goal to work with Attorney Fever, where you guys would have definitive standards that the applicant would have to satisfy for you guys to feel comfortable approving them. That way it's not just, oh, this one looks okay, or this one doesn't. You guys
Yeah.
would have, you'd be able to toe the line accordingly, so.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, bring that without opposition. I think we'd like to see something a little more concrete
Sounds good.
to work with, and maybe, just like the previous discussion, a little more guidance that goes a long way. Yeah,
That sounds good.
okay, good. Thank you very much. Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second motion.
We have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the ayes have it. Thank you.